Hi everyone, welcome to History and Systems of Psychology. Happy to have you here and hope you've enjoyed the day so far. We're going to go ahead and get started. I wanted to talk first of all about the exam that is going to open a week from today. It will be composed of information from chapters 8 through 10, as well as what we cover in terms of Freud today. All right. I am going to, in just a few minutes, give you a few items, quiz items, so to speak, so you can assess your learning at this moment. If you had to take the exam today, how would you do, sort of thing? All right. Following that, we will start talking about Freud, and then I have a video on Freud I'd like for you to watch. I did post the photo voice instructions. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to see those, but if you have any questions once you read over them, let me know. I know we discussed them during last class, but it was a pretty quick discussion. All right. Okay, so if you can get out a piece of paper and close your notes and book. I have a few questions I'm going to ask you. Ready to go? Lots of people ready to offer you paper, huh? That's nice. We're very altruistic in this class. Okay, question number 1. We talked a lot about William James, right? What did his father suffer from? All right, this is the theory that argues that the contents of human consciousness are more like a stream than a collection of discrete elements or ideas. What is this called? There's a theory of emotion that James came up with along with another scientist. What is that theory of emotion? Number, is this 5? 4, okay. What developmental period of life is G. Stanley Hall credited with basically starting, right, or recognizing, I suppose? And I know we touched a little bit on James and Hall on the last exam. And question number 5 is, how did he view this time period of development? There was a short phrase that goes with how he viewed this particular time period of development. Okay, this person is the last person that Stanley Hall supervised, the last PhD student he supervised before his death. What was that person's name? All right, question number 7. Mamie Phipps Clark and Kenneth B. Clark conducted a groundbreaking study. What was the name of this study, or what was the topic of the study? And then it is also linked to a legal case. If you can remember that, that's a little bonus for you. All right. Question number 8. This person came up with a paired associates technique. So I want to know which psychologist came up with the paired associates technique. Briefly describe Pavlov's early life. And by briefly, I mean in a sentence. He would not be happy with that, right? But you're going to have to do that right now. All right, are you ready to see how you did? How does everyone feel, first of all? Okay, this. So on a scale of 1 to 5, a 3. Right. Okay. If I miss a question, please let me know. I believe the first question I asked had to do with what William James' father suffered from.
So what did you put down? Exactly. Very good. Good so far? All right. And those were categorized by anxiety, depression, this feeling of worthlessness, basically an existential crisis, and led to his father. I mean, his father had a hard time getting over it, and it wasn't until he met someone else that he was able to start getting over his vastations and lead a life that had a sense of purpose for him, right? Okay. Question number 2 should be easy. The contents of human consciousness are more like a stream than a collection of discrete elements. You should have written stream of consciousness. Hooray. Good. Okay. I have tiny notes in here of what I asked, and they're really scribbly. I think what I asked was, what period of development did G. Stanley Hall create? And create's not the best word, but he created a term for a period of development. You wrote down adolescence, and that was right. That's exactly right. And then was adolescence deemed as a period of calm and a sense of ease? He viewed it as a time of storm and stress.
Or Twister and Charlotte.
Okay, well that's, yeah, like that's the gist of it, right? A period of storm and stress. And I talked about this when we covered him. Now, ideal parenting is regarded as more akin to roots and wings. So building these roots in the family structure, so you have that solid family structure, and you have a secure base as a family for the growing person to come back to, but you also want to give someone wings so that they have that sense of autonomy. And we do hear it's sort of fallen out of fashion, but the term helicopter parenting used to be pretty prolific, and that was people who really hovered over their children and did not allow them to grow those wings. Okay. Right. This was the last PhD student that G. Stanley Hall supervised. For the win, who do we have? First name Francis. Mm-hmm. And if you want to be really, really accurate, Francis Cecil Sumner. All right, good. Sumner was unique in that he was the first African American to receive a PhD in psychology. You'll need to know that. He did his dissertation over the psychoanalysis of Freud and Adler, yet his area of study later on was in the area of religious psychology, right? So looking at the psychology of religion. Okay. Now, so Sumner worked at Howard and he supervised two students by the name of Mamie Phipps Clark and Kenneth B. Clark. What foundational study are they known for?
The doll study.
Excellent, the Dolls study. And can you tell me the landmark case that Dolls study, so the Dolls study was referenced in a certain case?
Brown versus Board.
Yeah, Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. And that was the first time, this will definitely be on the exam, that this evidence was brought into court in that manner, using social science evidence as a way of building a case for or against something. Okay. She originated the Parrott Associates technique, and her name was, starts with a C. Is that right?
Calkin.
Calkins, yeah, exactly. Calkins. The Parrott Associates technique was an
An experimental study in associative learning. Remember, she had, I believe it was different, was it numbers on pieces of paper? And they were different colors, right? And so if all of the numbers were shown an equal amount of time, what numbers were remembered more frequently? Yeah, so those numbers that were paired with vivid colors, everything else being equal, were remembered more frequently. And then I believe I talked about the Stroop test, which is one that's used in psychology. And that is where you'll have different color names like yellow, green, blue, and orange. But they're written in different colors. So yellow might be written in blue, orange might be written in pink. And what you have to do is, rather than read yellow, is tell me the color that it's in. So for fun, I don't know, maybe a stretch of the word fun, we might do that in class, and we can time it on Tuesday. I believe there's two more questions. I asked you to provide a vacuum-packed sentence summary over Pavlov's early life. So what are some things that you would say about that early life? Did it look like William James or or Darwin?
You say, no, those are different people. Not remembering this as much? Okay. He came from very much, I won't say totally impoverished, but he didn't come from a family of doctors or scientists. In the book on page 319, it talks about the fact that although the father was a local priest and the mom was the daughter of a local priest, the parents worked in the fields all day to put food on the table. Okay. And he was able to continue his schooling by winning
a government-supported scholarship to attend the University of St. Petersburg. So from an early age, unlike some of our psychologists who come in and they really were dilettantes in school and just didn't do very well, he did well from a very young age and was very focused. Okay, we have one more question. Did I give you another one? Okay, what was 3, please?
Oh, yeah, James Lange theory of emotion. Okay, have I skipped any others? All right, excellent. Well, that takes us to Pavlov. Tell me a little bit about how his career began. So Pavlov was a poor but very gifted student. He received a scholarship to attend the University of St. Petersburg. Way to go. That's pretty, not a shoddy university. What did he do career-wise early on?
Physiologist.
He was a physiologist, right? And he was investigating, after he graduated, he was looking at digestion, right? And we talked about the fact that digestion is a really complex phenomena, whether it be digestion of your dog, your cat, or yourself, right? And so he would make little holes where he could look at the digestion of various animals and describe the process. He did win a Nobel Prize for his research in this area, right? He talked about psychic secretions, which doesn't sound like digestion at all, right? But that's what it was called. What did I want to ask you? I'm trying to think. You know, when something, you forget it like that. I hope I'm not the only person that does that. Oh, what did he have to say about psychology early on?
That's what I wrote down. It was he didn't want to be associated with soft-hearted psychology.
Exactly. So he thought of that as soft-minded, which is we now know is pretty incorrect, and did not want to be associated with that in any way, shape, or form. Okay. All right. Oh, we talked about different stimuli and the introduction of stimuli paired with something else, right? So of course the bell and the dog food. And then we talked about how we can vary that initial stimuli, right? So we could have a larger bell, or maybe we could have something that honked. And the degree to which that new initial stimuli results in the same response is known as what? Starts with a G.
Generalization.
Yes, generalization. That's exactly right. Generalization. And so then what happens when we get to the point where this stimuli is enough different from the earliest stimuli that we no longer recognize it? What is that?
Differentiation.
Very good. You got the terms today. Good job. Okay, differentiation. And there was one more thing that we talked about in terms of Pavlov. What happened when the stimuli started differing wildly for dogs? What phenomenon did Pavlov observe?
Was it the experimental neurosis?
That's exactly right. Experimental neurosis. And he said that that's also something that we can see in people, correct? Okay. All right. Moving on to review a little bit of John B. Watson. Was he the type of student that Pavlov was? Was he studious and really committed to things early on? Remember, his nickname was Swads because he got in fights and they were pretty bad. And then he shot a gun in city limits. And so he was a little bit of I don't know if you call it a carouser. I don't use that term very often. But school was not his thing, right? He barely made passing grades. And yet, he was still able to get into school where he was going to study to become, yet again, what the parents wanted, a clergyman, right? And that was, his mom was just really, literally praying that he went into that because he just was not, he was acting like his wayward father, right? And she was like, I don't want that. Luckily, he found something that he was really passionate about and settled down, and we're glad that he did because we have a lot of information about psychology. Okay.
He also he had a resolve he was super ambitious. And I mentioned this quote in class on Tuesday. One of the reasons he wanted to earn a PhD was because he wanted to have a higher degree than his professor had when he was in graduate school. And so one of his goals was, I'm going to attain this higher degree, and then this person is going to have to listen to me and hear what I have to say. So there was a little bit of sort of a competitive streak to what he was doing. Okay. He did not get on board with introspection. He was introduced to it. He went to the University of Chicago, and he found this method really uninspiring. Where he excelled was in animal psychology, and he'd grown up with lots of animals, so that's something that he pursued. And over time, he was conducting a lot of psychology experiments on animals. He grew his research team, and then that led over time to behaviorism, right? So something that we see in Pavlov and we see continuing with John B. Watson. All right. And this idea that rewards and consequences really shape behavior. Okay. Watson is known for the Little Albert experiment, right? Yeah. And not something that it wasn't ethical at the time, and it certainly would not be approved today by the IRB. Could you imagine, like an 11-month boy, you're subjecting them to things like to make them super fearful of a group of things? What did he do later in life that he really enjoyed? He had a big career change.
He did like advertising.
Yeah, he did advertising. So he was offered a job at a university. He was also offered an advertising job, and that job, I think, paid $25,000 a year, which was pretty astronomical at the time, and it was 4 times what he was getting for being a professor. So he took that job, and he applied his principles to selling things to people, right? And found that to be, he took as much interest in seeing the growth of a sales curve as he did working with animals. So he did a lot in respect to that. And when you think about advertising and you think about marketing, it sure does use a lot of psychology, right? Lots of psychological and sociological principles. And if we talked a little bit about ageism during the social psychology part, but social psychology is definitely used in selling products to older, we'll just say women like myself, right? As well as a lot of psychological sort of tactics that are used.
Any questions about Watson? Okay. The last person we touched on, and we're just going to go a little bit into a review of this person, is Skinner. Okay. I don't know if we talked about his early life, but he was born in Pennsylvania. His father was a self-taught lawyer who never attended college and passed his bar exam after 1 year in law school. Pretty impressive. He was a persuasive speaker and author of a well-regarded textbook on workmen's compensation law. Sort of interesting. Skinner described his mother as bright and beautiful. What a kind child. She was, they mentioned, popular, a great singer, and second in her class, so had a smart mom. Skinner showed, so rather than just purely academic acumen, he showed interest and skill in a lot of different areas. And he was the kid who was like making contraptions, right? Like developing all these things. But he also had musical expertise. So just varied interest. And in that respect, sometimes when you have a lot of talent in a variety of areas and a lot of different interests, it can be really hard to settle on a career path. But again, lucky for us, he settled on psychology. We will talk in class on Tuesday a little bit more about the different reinforcers that were mentioned in the video that you watched toward the tail end of class. And we will also discuss a little bit about applied behavioral analysis, ABA, which uses the principles of behaviorism in the treatment of people with autism and does that quite successfully. All right, well, we are done with that chapter for the most part, and we are on to Sigmund Freud. I want to start the conversation by asking you what you know or remember about Sigmund Freud, which is going to be in chapter 11, but I don't want you to look at the book. I want you to tell me what are things that come to mind. Not everyone all at once. I'm overwhelmed.
How about get into dynamic duos? So groups of two, we may have a three, and I want you to jot down 5 things, brainstorm without book or notes, things you remember about Freud. I'll give you a couple of minutes. Okay. Let's see. Can you go with Eric? If the two of you do, then we have duos all the way, I think. Okay, thank you. Please keep talking.
So that's analysis, the stages of
Analysis, and then later developed other therapeutic techniques.
Yeah. Like when we discussed in class, it's like theories are applicated, right?
You will build.
You know, expressive id, superego, yeah, I think you get my focus.
That most of our behavior.
Are you peeking? I see that. That was the behaviorist in me, trying to figure out what that behavior was doing, what you were doing. Maybe fanning yourself.
It was like not.
That's where we came up with these and suddenly everyone's talking about it.
Have you
It's like
exhausted
you
your
didn't-
knowledge of
you
Freud?
didn't study your actions.
You guys have 2? Okay, all right. Exhausted all knowledge of Freud over here? Can't remember, all right, all right.
days go.
Need to work that hippocampus.
Yeah. Sometimes in
All right, let's say we'll call it here. And I want to hear something from each group. Going first is always a good idea, I think, in this respect, right?
We talked about the unconscious mind for a second. What we remembered about it.
Yes, what you remember about the unconscious mind, excellent. Others,
You explored hypnosis.
and we touched on that actually in class, right? Okay, keep talking while I get a marker that writes a little bit better. Another group. We're good on this side, right?
The famous psychosexual stages
Uh-huh.
of development.
And this writes only a tiny bit better. Okay,
You spoke about the id, ego, and superego.
okay.
Psychoanalysis isn't like that, it's
Mhm.
the framework.
Okay, Christine, your group have anything to add, or have they already said everything that you had in your mind?
They're not only very good with remember about the hypnosis.
Okay, good, good. Anyone want another round? Everyone with me? Is that it?
We talked about his idea of the Oedipus and Electra complex.
Good, good. And this is going to tie into development. All right. Well, not a bad start. Let's talk briefly about each of these items. First of all, he was introduced to hypnosis in his training. He became very interested in it, but he didn't think it was the best method to use to help people. All right. Again, he saw social suggestion as important, but we should be able to suggest and help people work through things without them being not so conscious, right? So we can do this actually with people, and we don't need to hypnotize them. We don't need to magnetize them, right? Do animal magnetism with them. So definitely his theory, you can see like snippets of hypnosis sort of embedded within his theory. So that was an important part of his education. He talked about the unconscious mind, and he's not the first person to ever mention the word unconscious or state that something like that exists, but he's the person who really described it the way we still use it today, okay? So this fact that we have things that we do in our conscious life, but we have a lot of these unconscious thoughts that we're not aware of. And he looked at dreams as a time where we are able to unpack those thoughts, and dreams are a way, in Freud's eyes, of starting to deal with those things. So maybe there's something that you've really suppressed, okay, kind of, if anyone mashes down things. I'm a big masher down of like emotions and other things, but so you've suppressed something that happened that is just not good, right? You view it as not good. It may be that you get little snippets of that or some symbols that come at you through a dream, and it's like, oh wow, I'm really worried about it. So using the dream to start working through things. And then he would go further and say in a session, let's unpack this dream. Let's see what it really means, right? And that was a way for people to heal. Carl Jung is another person that said a lot about dreams. He and Freud were actually good friends and then departed, but both of them have a lot to say about that. All right. Id, ego, and superego. This is the iceberg analogy, if you've seen that before. So if we're on, this is the water, okay? This is the iceberg. The id is underneath. So those are the unconscious wishes, impulses. And then the id is the one that the cruise ship's going on, okay? That's your id. That's how you present. That's everyday life. And then you have this higher thing known as your superego. And that's your moral judgment, right? So what Freud said, he didn't think that we were necessarily great as people naturally. He said we were driven by our biological needs, so not so cognitive, and we try to get those needs met. He said we're always in continual sort of fight mode between the id and the superego, okay? So it's that dated image of like the angel and the devil on the shoulder, and so the devil would be the id and the angel would be the superego, right? Okay. Like I said, he believed that we are motivated by our biological impulses, specifically psychosexual impulses. And to that end, he and Erikson are both psychoanalytic theorists. Erikson focuses on psychosocial crises that we go through in our growth, whereas Freud focuses on different psychosexual stages. And he believed that development, for the most part, was done when you were 18, okay? So you're developing, and then you're there, and then the joke that you spend the rest of your life trying to deal with your childhood, sort of make peace with that, all right? So childhood was huge in his mind, and he believed that we went through stages. So
Latency stage is an example, oral, anal stage, those types of things were central to his theory. Okay. And then last, and within this, the Oedipus and Electra complex. So in both cases, if you're a boy and maybe 5 or 6 years old, you're feeling a strong attraction to your mother and of somewhat of a sexual nature, and you feel that this is wrong, your superego is saying, I don't think that's okay. His idea was with the Oedipus complex, you reject that parent and you start to align more so with the same-sex parent. So the opposite is true with the Electra complex, okay? That's where we're talking about females. All right, everyone with me? Psychoanalysis is what he developed as his practice. So he was not only a theorist, he was a practitioner. He worked with clients. Up to this point, we have pretty hardcore researchers, right, for the most part. And now we're seeing someone who is going more into that clinical therapeutic realm and treating people. Although, I mean, Mesmer treated people, but the lasting power of that wasn't so great. Okay. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about Freud's early life, and then I have a video that I will show you in 2 parts. So we'll spend about the last 20 or 30 minutes watching this video, and then whatever we don't see, we will get to on Tuesday. What country was Freud from?
German.
He was German.
And, well, actually, he was Viennese, but he was, his dad was pretty hardcore, okay? And so his life was complicated. His mom died early on, all right? And a lot of his upbringing was by basically like a nanny. And this nanny was Catholic through and through. And so when the child, Freud was under the nanny's care, which was a large part of the time because the dad was working, right? He received a very Catholic upbringing and was taught the principles of Catholicism. All right, this goes in opposition to his father, who was staunchly Jewish. So there early on is this fight between 2 different religious identities that we see in Freud. If you've not had the chance to watch Freud's last session, I think you will really enjoy that. I highly recommend it. It's I think I saw it with a couple of the professors from our department maybe a year and a half ago. So it has Anthony Hopkins. It's very good. And what that does is it explores, it's a hypothetical story about Freud and C.S. Lewis, and it covers how they feel about the existence of God. So C.S. Lewis, if you don't know a lot about him, he's definitely religious inspired. What's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? He does those things. And then Freud felt differently about God, especially as he grew older. So that's the premise of it, and it's just superbly done. It's really, really well done. They talk about that. You have the introduction of Tolkien. There's lots of history, so it paints a good sociocultural picture of what was going on during Freud's life in middle age especially, and also does a good job depicting the relationship between Freud and his daughter Anna. So Anna Freud was Freud's daughter, and she received a lot of acclaim in her own right. Okay, she also practiced psychoanalysis. She was a woman during the time where there weren't many women. You know, we have Calkins as a reference, but not a whole lot of people who were doing things in their field and you know, teaching a lot of men. And so sometimes her teachings were not regarded as highly as her father's, but she did teach psychoanalysis. She became especially interested later in her career in child development. So she has a lasting legacy as well. She also was in a relationship with another female, and that the movie does a nice job depicting that and just her own struggles with that, as well as her her dad's, Freud struggles with that. And you also see in that movie a great deal of codependence between Sigmund Freud and his daughter. So I can't say enough good things about it. I've shown several classes and I've watched it like 5 times now, and I still enjoy watching it. So that says a lot, right? Okay. All right, I kind of got off on a tangent there. So we're back, and Freud is growing up, and there's lots of kind of angst going on in his household. So that's where we are. Okay, early interests were in history and humanities, and he was thinking about a career in law. Until, like we see a lot of the times, chance intervenes. So a chance reading of an inspiring essay aroused more scientific ambitions. So he got interested in science and philosophy. He encountered the philosopher Franz Brentano, and this person was a contemporary of Wundt, so really, really well regarded. So he started getting interested in that and the idea of psychology. Okay, so Freud took 5 elective courses with Brentano. He was studying medicine and might have abandoned medicine for philosophy had he not encountered another person that was really foundational to him and the establishment of his theory. Okay, so Freud became a doctor. This was not someone who was solely a practitioner, and solely a practitioner, I mean, that doesn't do it justice. Like, that's a huge thing, right? Being a practitioner. But he also was very, very interested in research. And so he maybe was not fully as involved as a doctor as he was in splitting his time between his medical duties and also his research interests. That was really important. And the idea of research and higher education was greatly influenced by the philosophers that he encountered while he was in college studying. Okay. He was a prized pupil, and his early interest was in the treatment of traumatic brain injuries. He published some substantial works on aphasia. Remember, we've talked about aphasia and Broca's and Wernicke's areas, and cerebral palsy, but he found he could not make a living by treating only ordinary neurological cases. So, you go from this, someone who's really interested in research, interested in neuroscience, and in treating people, the brains of people. But in doing so, he finds there's not a lot of money. Also, he was at a disadvantage because of the anti-Semitic sentiments that were going on. So there was a struggle there. What happens is from there, he gets introduced to hypnosis, and that has a profound influence on the direction of his career and progression as an adult. So what I'd like to do right now is, first of all, make sure you read this chapter on Freud. Also, one more announcement, study guide will be out to you by 9 p.m. tonight, okay? Work on it, bring it to class with you on Tuesday. We'll do a little quiz. Remember, I think it was Valentine's Day and I had like the Valentine goodies. So we'll do some Easter goodies because we're around that time, and prep for the exam, which will open on Wednesday. Okay, read the photo voice instructions. Let me know if you have questions, and then we're in good shape. So, all right, let me pull this up. Please take notes. You'll have an essay question about this movie or this documentary on the exam. And we'll watch a portion today. It's a little quiet, so I hope I can fix the sound enough. And it's also posted in your course shell.
The problem I've always faced is I can never get my words out in the exact way my brain wants to, which is why
Okay, I am
Grammarly
so
is so
sorry.
great. Grammarly is an
Are you
AI
okay?
writing partner that works seamlessly
Okay.
with your everyday
Oh my
apps,
gosh,
and
that
that
was
helps
so
professionals
stressful.
write better
I am
and
so
faster
sorry.
so
It
they
was
can get
really
their work
quiet on
done.
my
Grammarly
computer.
gives you personalized writing
All right.
patients would come to lie on this very couch and
I feel so bad about that. All right, moving on. We're going to start this at, let's go at 5 minutes. Here we go.
half-brothers was
Is that loud
even
enough?
older than his mum.
Yeah.
Sigmund's closest playmate was in fact his own nephew. But they were to be wrenched apart. Because when Sigmund was 3, his father's small business selling wool collapsed, scattering the entire family in search of work. Life may have been imperfect, but where Freud's family ended up would prove to be a critical factor in the future success of the young boy. Vienna in the 1860s, imperial capital of the Habsburg Empire, was a city at the forefront of social change. The Europe-wide revolutions of 1848 had undermined aristocratic, conservative rule here, allowing a kind of edgy liberalism to flourish on the streets. There were also an unusual number of immigrants in the city, so Freud would have grown up surrounded by a cosmopolitan mix of voices and cultures. This is the Jewish district where Freud's family first lived. It was poor and overcrowded, but many capitalised on the opportunities that the city offered and quickly rose from the margins. They became newspaper magnates and bankers, academics, doctors and lawyers. Freud's parents passionately wanted the same for their clever eldest son. Of his 6 siblings, he was the only one given his own room to work in, and he topped his class for 7 years. The young Freud's intense studies seem to have fed into his self-image as someone destined for greatness. He found inspiration in ancient civilizations, in the glory that was Greece and the grandeur that was Rome. And he came to identify with powerful, heroic figures from history and literature, like Moses and Hannibal and Alexander the Great. In 1873, at the age of 17, Sigmund sought his own glory at Vienna University. Initially dabbling in philosophy and law, he was soon drawn to the university's celebrated natural scientists and their guiding light, the Englishman Charles Darwin. Darwin's remarkable, epoch-defining theory of evolution chimed with Freud's desire for kudos and celebrity. But to match up to his hero meant hours of meticulous, painstaking, not obviously glamorous laboratory work, trying to unravel the mysteries of the nervous system of fish. Freud himself said that his studies in anatomy, zoology, chemistry and botany made him a godless medical man and an empiricist. And certainly his time here nurtured a scientific worldview that never left him. If you look at this picture of him from the time, you can just imagine the precise, clinical fish dissector. A man who seems to be both neat and orderly in appearance and character. At age 25, Freud fell wildly in love with a young woman, Martha Bernays. Their early correspondence reveals an altogether different side to Freud.
There's probably 1,600 letters in all. They were writing more or less every day, sometimes 2 or even 3 letters a day. Bits have been released of his letters alone, but this is the first time now that we're seeing her letters.
How brilliant. So we've got Martha's voice. What's she saying? What does she write about here?
Well, anything and everything. I mean, in this case, she had just sent Freud a lock of her hair to put in a little brooch, you know, as lovers do. And Freud had written back, "I hope you didn't tear it out, or did it come out when you were combing?" So here, in this letter here, she is taking him to task for his ignorance. She says, you know, you're a doctor, you have no idea of the code of love. One does not send one's lover ripped out or combed out hair.
I suppose this is the first time he's had a full-blown love affair.
It is his first and his only. And this is one of the things about these letters. You get an insight into Freud that you'll get nowhere else. And he's losing his control sometimes. That he really is almost on the edge of a nervous breakdown when he feels they can't go on, when he feels there's an impossible disagreement between her. She is for sweeping it under the carpet. She says, why do you wallow around in this stuff that makes us miserable? And he says, you know, you have to face it, you have to talk through it.
That's fascinating. So it's almost like we've got Freud, the proto-psychoanalyst here.
Yes. I mean, the psychoanalytic dictum is say everything that's on your mind, don't censor, don't repress. It's there already.
Martha had opened Freud's eyes to a world of demanding human emotion. And the financial pressures of their engagement saw him casting around for opportunities beyond the lab. Eventually, he abandoned his research career to study medicine. And one day, when he was reading a medical journal, he came across something that he was convinced would make his name. In 1884, he wrote to Martha about a magical drug, little known at the time, cocaine. In this pretty sober analysis, he says, I take very small doses of it regularly against depression and against indigestion, and with the most brilliant success. But then just listen to this when he's also writing to Martha, where he sounds suspiciously like he's under the influence. Woe to you, my princess, when I come. You shall see who is the stronger, a gentle little girl who does not eat enough, or a big, wild man who has cocaine in his body. At first, Freud denied that cocaine was harmful, but his rash endorsement would damage his reputation. When he gave it to a friend suffering from morphine addiction, in the hope that cocaine would cure him, the consequences were disastrous. His friend became as addicted to the new drug as he had been to the old. Freud did manage to give up cocaine, but his appetite for experimentation would not be stilled. He had a new interest, neurology, the study of nervous diseases. And he made a very canny move, travelling to the centre of this burgeoning science, an intellectual hotspot. This is Salpêtrière, in Freud's day a kind of medical poorhouse, a bleak dumping ground for some 5,000 women, many of whom were diagnosed as hysterical. Hysteria, from the Greek word for womb, was a mysterious condition that was thought to afflict women from the ancient world onwards. Really, it was just a catch-all diagnosis for all kinds of nervous symptoms, from fits and paralysis to anxiety and headaches. And for centuries, it was a dangerous tool in the hands of male doctors who were trigger-happy in diagnosing women as hysterical, to the point where they incarcerated perfectly sane individuals in hospitals and asylums. Freud came to Salpêtrière to study with the preeminent pioneer of neurology, Jean-Martin Charcot.
And that name should be familiar.
Having discovered that some nervous conditions like multiple sclerosis were the result of lesions on the brain, Charcot turned his attention to the mysteries of hysteria. The
Charcot approaches hysteria more scientifically and more seriously and doesn't think of it as simply a woman's ailment. And he sees distinct phases. He talks about the epileptoid phase, a tonic phase, a fit. And the fit was epileptic rigidity. He then talks about clonic phase, or the clown phase, where these huge thrashing movements take place.
So he's identified these different phases. What kinds of methods is he using to kind of further his scientific inquiry?
Well, Charcot uses hypnosis to diagnose hysteria. He thinks that if women are susceptible and men are susceptible to hypnosis, that's probably a sign that they do have hysteria. But he also uses hypnosis in his great public lectures, to which, all of Paris comes. Getting a ticket to go to one of Charcot's public lectures is like going to the best play in London.
So the patients were on display in these public lectures?
The patients were on display, and under hypnosis they will begin to walk, and they will talk, and they will effectively do what the medic asks of them.
So we know that Freud's there, he's in the audience, he's one of Charcot's pupils. Do we know what kind of an impact this had on Freud?
Well, I think it has an immense impact. He begins to see that there are different forms of thinking and activity going on in the human mind simultaneously. And that there are whole areas of the human mind that are there ready to be plumbed.
Freud returned to Vienna aged 29, full of new ideas and career plans. But things certainly weren't easy for Freud. When he first opened his practice in this apartment block in 1886, business was depressingly slow. Sometimes he couldn't even afford a cab to make house calls, and he could only marry Martha in the same year thanks to gifts and loans from friends. One of Freud's principal benefactors was the eminent physician Joseph Breuer. Like Freud, Breuer was curious about the scientific mysteries of hysteria. One of his old patients stood out. Breuer had treated a highly intelligent young woman from an affluent Jewish family called Bertha Pappenheim, giving her the pseudonym Anna O. She experienced hallucinations and suffered from partial paralysis. At times, she could only speak English. She appeared to have a split personality. Now, Anna's case really fascinated Freud, partly because of her extreme symptoms, but also because of the innovative way that Breuer treated her. During Breuer's consultations, Anna fell into a state of hypnosis and revealed melancholic details of her personal history. The talking revived significant or painful memories of past events that had been forgotten or somehow blocked up and suppressed. Breuer found that he could trace Anna's numerous symptoms back to original traumas. When Anna showed an aversion to drinking water, Breuer linked it back to her seeing a dog being allowed to drink out of the glass of its owner. But once she expressed her submerged disgust, her hydrophobia vanished. Freud realised that Breuer might have stumbled upon not just an explanation, but a cure for hysteria. Working from new, larger premises at number 19 Berggasse, he began to apply Breuer's cathartic treatment to his own neurotic patients. But Freud had a problem. He just couldn't hypnotise all of his patients. So he smartly turned a failing into a virtue and developed his own version of a talking therapy. Freud asked his patients to lie on this couch while he sat here behind them out of sight. He encouraged them to say whatever came into their minds, almost as if they were talking to themselves. He proved to be an alert listener, systematically sifting through and probing his patients' memories. Interpreting their confessions rapidly, intuitively, he attempted to unlock what was being suppressed. Freud gave his new free association method a new name. He took the ancient Greek word for mind or life breath, psyche, and added to it a robust scientific term, analyze. Psychoanalysis was born. In 1895, Breuer and Freud published their findings in a landmark book, Studies on Hysteria. Freud was keen to find a single unifying reason for hysteria neurosis, to offer their theory a kind of breakthrough moment. And he started to see sex as a central issue. The more cautious Breuer disagreed, but another friend proved far more receptive, the physician Wilhelm Fliess. Sexual morality had long been framed by religion, and by and large had been unremittingly repressive for centuries. But Fliess was one of a growing number of medical researchers who embarked on a scientific study of sexual identity and behaviour, unconstrained by orthodox moral judgments and what was generally considered to be perversion. Encouraged by the open-minded Fliess, Freud began to hone his ideas about hysteria and sexual issues. In April 1896, he went to read a paper to the Viennese Society for Psychiatry and Neurology. He described the job of treating patients with hysteria in epic terms, as if he were an explorer archaeologist sifting through the remains of an ancient ruined city, trying to find clues and evidence. Imagine that an explorer arrives in a little-known region where his interest is aroused by an expanse of ruins, with remains of walls, fragments of columns, and with... Freud claimed to have found a singular cause in all his neurotic cases, something he likened to discovering the source of the Nile. His daring theory, the seduction theory, was that all neuroses were the result of some kind of sexual abuse in childhood, typically by the father. But rather than the glory that he was expecting, the paper was met with bewilderment and skepticism. One eminent neurologist in the audience dismissed it as a scientific fairy tale. This frosty reception just enhanced Freud's view that he was an embattled pioneer, tackling taboo subjects. However, in little more than a year, even he would concede that his seduction theory was fatally flawed. Hysteria was so widespread that to imagine so many men were paedophilic abusers was highly implausible. With hysteria afflicting Freud's own family, the idea that his father Jacob could also be guilty was the final straw. Other speculations, however, would prove far more enduring. At the heart of Freud's thinking was how and why discomforting past thoughts could become repressed, only to be woven into the symptoms and psychic knots of everyday life. Freud believed that the unconscious mind held the key. The unconscious mind had been imagined and debated right across the human experience for many centuries, but Freud was one of the first to take a really systematic approach, to try to add precision to the perceptions of the unconscious mind. A painful personal tragedy would trigger his big breakthrough. In 1896, Freud was devastated by the death of his father. Freud wrote to Fliess, "My inner self, my whole past has been reawakened by this death. I now feel completely uprooted." But in fact, these complex, intense thoughts would have a catalyzing effect on him. Freud had been experimenting with self-analysis, scrutinizing his fragmentary childhood memories and deep-seated terrors. The loss of his father intensified that exploration, and the secret of his self-analysis, he started to analyze his own dreams. Few saw dreams as having any scientific substance, but Freud chose to think differently.
He looks at dreams as something that is multi-layered. There is the story that people remember when they wake up, but for Freud that story is only the surface of our dream. What lies underneath is what he calls the latent dream thoughts. But those latent thoughts become distorted, they become censored.
Why does this censorship need to happen?
Well, you see, these dream thoughts, they contain all the repressed wishes and thoughts and fantasies that consciousness considered to be disturbing and troubling. Were they not to be censored, then they would manifest themselves in all their disruptive force. For Freud, a dream is essentially a fulfillment of an unconscious wish.
How are Freud's ideas about the unconscious evolving at this time?
For Freud, the unconscious is no longer just a set of traumatic memories. It's a container of wishes and thoughts and fantasies that have been self-generated by the mental life of every human being.
What's the value of these for Freud? I mean, what's he doing with this raw material?
Within his clinical practice, he would piece together the various associations that people bring to the story that they remember, and with those bits and pieces, he would try to arrive at a certain understanding of those unconscious repressed wishes that sit underneath. With Freud's theory, we as human beings can look and think about our dreams as productions of our mind that actually reveal something about who we are, and that's extraordinarily valuable.
Freud's book, The Interpretation of Dreams, offered a radical new understanding of human nature, with the unconscious a reservoir of repressed inner desires and irrational impulses, the hidden source of what motivates and makes us. There's an interesting detail in the story of the publication of The Interpretation of Dreams. And although this book was actually published in 1899, it was branded with the date 1900. Freud was telling the world that the theories in here would define the 20th century and that they'd herald the birth of a daring, brave new world. But this brave new world was riddled with anxiety. It was said that to be Viennese was to be a question mark. Liberalism had failed to deliver real power to the middle classes, who felt threatened by a rising urban population. In this climate, an appetite grew for new experimental art that explored beneath the rational surface of human existence. Freud's theories perfectly matched the zeitgeist. In his next book, Psychopathology of Everyday Life, he continued to dig deep. In this, he argued that our repressed desires emerge not just in our dreams, but infiltrate our waking lives too. One interesting case he cites was when a high-ranking Austrian politician opened an important debate in Parliament with these words: "I announce the presence of so many honoured gentlemen and therefore declare the session as closed." This very public slip revealed his repressed frustration that the session would be a complete waste of time. And of course, we still use the phrase Freudian slip in everyday life today, usually to refer to a revealing or embarrassing verbal faux pas. Although Freud believed that our unconscious desires broke through due to triggers in our current lives, it was how those mysterious impulses were shaped by our past experiences that really preoccupied him. Something that finds echo in his consulting room. When Freud enthusiastically gathered together all these fabulous ancient artefacts, he didn't think of them as dead objects. For him, the past wasn't a kind of museum that you could choose whether or not to visit. It was alive, dynamic, present in our day-to-day lives. He thought that past experiences had something vital to tell us. In fact, it was a story from classical Greece that would inspire his next big idea.
Chor, bitte zum Boten. Bote und Ödipus. Also Ödipus setzt dir auf den Zulaut und das geht's nicht. Aber
Freud attended a performance of a Greek tragedy by Sophocles.
Gut, Action.
Was hast du, Ödipus? Was ist es, das deinen Geist so niederschlägt?
Frag mich nicht. Doch sag mir erst, wie Laios aussah und wie alt er war.
Oedipus Rex tells the story of a young man who inadvertently kills his father and then marries and has children with his mother.
Groß war er und weiß sein Haar und deinem Ansehen nicht weit entfernt.
When Oedipus discovers the terrible truth, he stabs out his own eyes. Freud saw this story as a paradigm to explain his own repressed sexual feelings.
Genau, auch noch intensiver. Welcher Spruch?
This is what he wrote to Fleece. A single idea dawned on me. I found in my own case too the phenomena of being in love with my mother and jealous of my father, and I now consider it a universal event in early childhood. Freud named this psychosexual drama the Oedipus complex. He came to believe that little boys had to work through hidden fears of castration by their fathers, punishment for desiring and seeking possession of their mothers, and that little girls were infatuated by their fathers but had to deal with complex feelings of inferiority because they themselves didn't have a penis, what Freud calls penis envy. Freud believed that if these complicated feelings weren't resolved, internal conflicts would be stored up, only to cause adult neuroses later in life. Freud was keen to test out his theories about repressed sexual issues. And in October 1900, the opportunity arose to do just that. A new patient walked into his office, a 17-year-old girl who he'd give the pseudonym Dora. She was his first and his most famous case study. Dora was exhibiting hysterical symptoms, a nervous cough and suicidal thoughts.
One of the most shocking things in the story is that when she was 13 or 14, her father's best friend, Herr K., manipulated the situation to get her alone in his office and kissed her. Freud says, well, this was thoroughly hysterical, that she was disgusted by the kiss.
Okay, on that note, we are through with class for today. Be looking for that study guide. Hopefully you'll get it before 9 p.m. tonight. I'll do my best. And have a good weekend. Remember, I have some supplemental like viewing material and things online that accompany the last few chapters.